the people that you have been seeing before in the story of the photographer, who, I forgot to mention, is an art photographer from New York, Livia Corona, not an architectural photographer, but somebody who has a very acute capacity to show or to deal with the relationship of people and houses. So what happens, and we made actually tests before printing this book with these drawings. We gave the photographs and then the drawings to people that we knew that didn't know much about architecture, but were culturally interested in it. That is important. And told them, okay, what do you see? They said, oh, this is the lawnmower guy. Oh, I understand. And I said, oh, these are the people having breakfast. Ah, there is the basket with the wood in it. Ah, now I can see there's the oven in the background. So with the help of figurative elements of people and also of objects that you could easily discern before, people could even read a plan. They could actually understand that if this is the guy with the lawnmower, and that's the husband sitting being in the bed, looking out to the rainbow, then they could go back to the photograph and could understand that the exterior wall of this is the outer wall of the bedroom. So they could start understanding spatial relationships. One of the most important things if you want to judge an architectural project, and I think the public needs to be able to do that, because very often there's public discussions, debates about whether or not one should do this or that project that introduces, let's say, a ramp in a street, and whether or not the audience wants that, the public, whether or not the audience feels that this is actually a meaningful contribution to the city. But if you can't read plans, you can be fooled very easily. So we would basically teach reading plans to people, and in the book we tried to do it. And it actually worked out. This is what we were really happy about. People actually, I gave this to my local kiosk guy, and he said, yeah, this once there's an architecture book that is for me. And this was also due to the fact that we have a very peculiar way of dealing with text, because we basically, as we write a lot of text about our buildings, like descriptions for Bauwelt and these magazines that are only read and not even read by architects, because architects just look at the pictures and don't read the text. They say, okay, I don't need to read the text, I understand the project very well from the photographs and the plans. And obviously there's something else that you cannot represent in photographs and plans. That's what you need text for. But basically, because we know that descriptive texts are almost never read, we tried to invent something else. And what we did is, I was teaching it was an accident, a nice accident. I was teaching in Graz at that time architectural theory, and I took my students and said, okay, why don't we make the text for this book could be very nice. And I want you to interview a broad range of people that have to do with one project, that have a direct physical relationship experience of that project. So in this case, for instance, I asked the student to interview, obviously, the people, the clients, the parents and the son. The son was very important. It's a 10-year-old guy who had made brilliant remarks about architecture. For instance, he had understood, he said, one of the coolest things about this house, the fact that it's a free plan where there's actually no doors, is that my parents can't lock me away if I have done something bad. In our city apartment in Graz, they can always do this. Then I stop in the evening, but here they can't. So we have to find a solution. So we get on better. And so it's the parents, it's neighbors, it's passers-by, it's the mayor maybe if he had an important political role in making the project possible. So it's all kinds of people. Or the banker who gave the loan, and they all ask them, what do you think of this building? What's your account of this building? And you get all these kind of mosaic kind of perceptions, a cross-section of a very differential social perception of one object, of one house. And that becomes very, very fascinating, because we obviously have very different groups and types of people, from young to old, from very educated to not very educated. We have very different kinds of statements, from very positive to also quite negative, quite critical. And we didn't edit out the critical remarks. We just made sure that they're in a good balance to the positive remarks, because we wanted to sort of display a possible cross-section of opinions that you could have of that building. And very often also the critical remarks are quite reflected, quite interesting. And very often someone criticizes something that somebody else actually likes a lot. So what you understand in the end, I mean, most of the Austrian architects in this book didn't understand it because they thought it's not okay, first of all, to allow a layperson to talk about architecture. That's what they told me afterwards. And secondly, it's not okay. It's even less okay that this person can even voice a criticism. You know, because they are not competent, they would say. And then we said, yeah, I don't believe that. I think they are competent in their own way, and I'm interested in their opinion. But they couldn't interfere with the book, so the book was very radical in this regard, and it actually sort of found its audience because the critical remarks have not the function to pull the building down. No, it's like in normal architectural criticism. You try to form an opinion that animates you as a reader of that criticism to form your own opinion. I'm not interested as a critic, or I don't see my role as a critic to say, I tell you what is good and what is bad. I'm not fabricating an opinion that other people should copy. No, I'm a catalyst of opinion building. That's a very different definition. And this is what these little texts make, because you read one remark and say, wow, that's a very particular opinion. And then you want to learn the next one, and so on and so on. In the end, my kiosk sales guy had read the entire book. That's amazing. I mean, not a thin book. There's a lot of text in it. And he said, I read it because all these texts were so short, so they were easy to read. They were also in a language that I could understand. Except when the architects talk, we obviously also let the architects talk. You know, they talk in their own idiom. That's fine. But they could always, the texts were always kind of accessible. Just to show you how the book works onward as a principle, before I end this talk, between the project there was always one image that didn't show a project, that was from the landscape, from this road trip that we had done, also to remind architects and everyone else that the world doesn't consist of 100% of architecture. There are other moments that may not be what we think we would have done in that situation, but that are okay as well. You know, there's this psychology book, I think in the 70s came out, it was called I'm Okay, You're Okay. I think we should adopt that approach in architecture a little bit as well. You know. And then there's situations like these, which are quite fantastic. This is a project for the redefinition of village centers. Around Graz, there's a phenomenon that you probably know as well, which is called urbanization. It's from rural and urban, this kind of mix. So we have former villages around the city of Graz, which become more and more sleeping towns for people who work in Graz but live on the countryside. But there are no farmers anymore. And so they become sleeping towns, and these villages that once had a center and a very interesting existing fabric, they disfigure into something amorph. So this project was about giving you four new centers for 4 different villages, and I show you one of them. And the way that the story was told is through this. We activated the local football team and asked them to play soccer on this place, on this square. So why did they do that? Here's the plan. What you basically see is that is actually the entire space that one could have articulated as a center. The architects, however, were only given this small space, which is somewhat alienated by this major traffic road that goes here, and that has one lane this way, the other way that way, with a huge traffic island that is totally useless. It's so empty that somebody even has to place a piece of art so that it doesn't look so empty. And the architects had tried in vain before they designed the project to convince the traffic engineer to not make this traffic solution where you lose so much space for this traffic island, but actually to organize all the the road surface on that side so that this piece of land could be joined to that lot. And then we would have a square that was twice as big. But as you know, traffic engineers are a pain, and they think they're the urbanists, and they couldn't convince them. So what they were doing then is they actually tried to graphically prolong the surface of their square onto here. And obviously that's only symbolic. It doesn't make the square bigger than it is. But so to some extent you could say their ambition failed. They didn't manage, they didn't succeed to do what they wanted. But we thought their intention was so adorable that we wanted to pay homage to it. And that's basically what we're doing with this kind of scene, because these guys basically, by playing soccer, they claim the space back that wasn't given to them. And so it was a fantastic shoot, because we had the bus driver wait, and he was kind of pissed, but then these guys used the waiting stand for the bus as goal, and have their fun. And this is something that an ordinary person actually does understand in conjunction to the texts, where these stories are also a little bit written, so some people talk about these things, and so that by sort of combining the three levels of information of the photographic story, of the drawings with people and objects drawn inside, and the text inside, you get a complete picture that allows you to understand what this thing could be about. And this is basically how the book continues. It's always a story, it's always a scenography that we had defined together with a photographer. Basically, we had worked this way that Ilka and I had said why we think these buildings are important. We actually had selected these buildings from a pool of projects that were handed into the House of Architecture in Graz. They make this architecture award. So 80 projects were handed in. They had been built in the past 2 years, or 3 years, or something like this. And out of that, I was supposed as a curator to choose the best project of Graz or of Styria of that year, or of this period. But at the same time, I could nominate 12 projects that would go into the yearbook. So this was how this book was done. And then for each of these projects, we created these stories where we tried to communicate some of the aspects that we found important about these projects. For instance, in this case, the fact that you have the feeling that the building blends perfectly into its context by this Corten texture of the exterior walls, that you think it actually is melting even with the one. So you think here the guy is actually walking from this to that roof, but that roof is 20 meters behind. So if he would actually continue to climb, he would fall down and kill himself. But these slight moments of aberration are important. And also the drawings are drawn in a way that we leave out every technical information that is not important to understand what the space is about. So we never show, for instance, we always show the walls as solid, even if they aren't, even if there's technology inside it. We basically show only those things that you can actually see if you're inside a space or if you're outside a building looking at it. We leave out the rest. It's again one of those in-between shots. We call them ambient shots. And we show also projects that maybe don't look like awesomely beautiful in the first place, but that are politically important. This, for instance, is a project for people that are too poor to be accepted to social housing in Austria. It's people that come right out of prison, that live on the street, and that cannot even integrate into the disciplinary system of a social housing complex. And yet, these apartments are extremely small. They're like 35 square meters. And we have the feeling these people have such a strong sense of privacy, because if you live on the street for 10 years, you have no notion of privacy. So they actually have to learn to stay inside a flat, and it's painful in the beginning. They really have to learn to be inside a space. They have almost a phobia of an interior space. So that's why we thought, okay, this interior space that is really personal to them. We shouldn't even go in. That's their thing. And we should respect that this is a very precious and difficult civilizational exercise for them to understand how they can actually live and actually sleep inside a room. It's kind of a crazy story, but it's like that. And what is actually interesting that in all of these houses, this is basically a row house typology where everybody has almost its own entrance, actually has an own entrance, and they all